Hello and welcome to the second installment of Porous Pavement Hydrologic Modeling. My name is Maria Cahill and I have a consulting business called Green Girl Land Development Solutions. I created an Excel model for porous pavements that is open source that you can use if you're a designer and working in a jurisdiction that requires detention. And if that jurisdiction doesn't really understand how porous pavement works, then you might be able to use this Excel model to prove to them that porous pavement will meet and probably exceed their detention requirements. So what you're looking at right here, this first slide of a PowerPoint presentation, is a talk that I gave to participants of the LID Academy. I'm doing this work through a grant from the state of Oregon for OSU Extension, so Oregon State University. And this is a training that I did on February 28th, 2012. And there's a whole bunch of other information in this. You can see here there's 197 slides, so a whole bunch of information typed out and explained to you about citing porous pavements and designing porous pavements. But I'm not going to get into all of that. If you want to get a quick tour of the porous pavement resources that we have, then you should watch the first video, which is the simple modeling simple porous pavements. And you really should watch that first anyway, because the many of the steps are the same, and I'm not going to review them here. Okay, let's see. So let's jump right into the water balance model, which starts on slide 38. So here in Western Oregon and other places that have a type 1A rainfall distribution, it's all pretty similar. We get a certain amount of rainfall every year. You do too, right? That's the average annual rainfall. And the water balance model just looks at the site and says, where is the water at any one given time? So on an average annual basis, 40% goes back up as evaporation or evapotranspiration. So rain comes down and it hits the vegetation. And you know, if you've ever been in the Pacific Northwest, the vegetation is really amazing here. It's very dense. There's a lot of overstory. There's understory. There's tall tree, small trees and shrubs. There's ground cover, duff. All of that is intercepting rainfall and sending it back up into the air. It's a lot more dense than this picture here that I'm showing in a lot of places. So, but even in a field, even in a natural pasture, we might be seeing 40% evaporation. So not unreasonable. And on an average annual basis, a certain portion goes to become base flow. So it passes through the soil. It's not evapotranspired out through the roots of the trees. That's already been done. The soil's just too saturated, and it starts to fill up the pores of the shallow layer of soil and flow downhill. So it's flowing downhill to the stream here, and it's flowing downhill to become a seep or somewhere else. So. And then a portion of it becomes deep infiltration to recharge the aquifer. And when you add these two numbers up, you find that the whole shebang is 60% infiltration. So on an average annual basis, regardless of how much rainfall we get in a year, because Astoria at the northwestern tip of Oregon can get 100 inches of rain a year or something like that. Maybe even 120. And in Portland, just an hour and a half away, we get 37 inches of rainfall a year, and other places get more or less. But the pattern, the picture is the same. 40% evaporation, 60% infiltration, and very little runoff. So most people think that that's because I don't know, we have amazingly amazing soils that infiltrate a large volume of water. And that's actually true, but our amazing soils are clay. And it's really the interaction of the vegetation and the life that we have here, the function of the watershed, the way it all works together, and our rainfall patterns. So we have a type 1A rainfall pattern. That means that we get water we get small rainfalls for a long period of time over the course of the year. So small rainfalls over 9 months of the year. In Pennsylvania, where I'm from, they get large downpours in short periods of time. So that's a different kind of rainfall distribution. I think that's a type 2. So this 0.005 or half percent, this amount of runoff is basically no runoff. Only in very large, the very occasional large, intense rainstorm would we ever see runoff from the pre-developed site. So, and this, as I said, this is studies done by Chris May at the University of Washington a long time ago in the Pacific Northwest for clay soils. So this is a picture we have. And we say, oh, this is so beautiful, let's move here. So we have needs, and those needs are reasonable. We want shelter. We want to be able to get around. We need to feed ourselves. We want to have some place for our kids to live. But all of those things impact the watershed in some tremendous ways. So every year we are still getting the same amount of rainfall, but in this new place that we love so much, we're only on hard surfaces, we're only sending 2% of the rainfall back up as evaporation, and there's basically no infiltration anywhere we have a roof or a sidewalk or a pavement, a conventional pavement that is. And in the landscape areas, so we have 98% runoff from those surfaces. So that's a lot different than a 0.5% runoff. And then in the landscape areas, we don't have that incredible dense cover of overstory and understory. It's not as complex, and there aren't nearly as many roots in the ground because grass roots get as deep as grass is allowed to grow tall, and we keep mowing grass. So there's not a lot of soil animals in that soil either, and it's really the soil animals. The action of the roots help, but it's really the soil animals and the habitat that the roots provide for those soil animals that keep the long-term permeability of our watersheds going. And so we're not seeing nearly as much evaporation or infiltration. And that's also partly because we took this sloping landscape. It used to slope like this, but nobody wants to live on a hill. And so the builder put a big wall here, and he cut this area, and he filled this area. And anytime you fill an area, then you end up with a soil that acts a whole lot like concrete. So it's very easy to compact clay soils, especially even with foot traffic. So that's kind of an aside, but let's just keep rolling through here. So we've got the simplified picture is basically 2% evaporation in our pavement areas, which is the only place that we can deal with, right? We're working on porous pavements right now. So in a conventional system, we have 2% evaporation, 98% runoff, and no infiltration. We know that's not good for the watershed. And with porous pavement, we have some evaporation. I'm not sure what it is. It's unclear, especially in the Pacific Northwest. In Florida, where they get summer rains, they found that they could evaporate an inch of rain on an 80-degree day. But we don't usually get an inch of rain with an 80-degree day. We do get evaporation in between rainfalls, but how much that is, I don't know. And then, but it is there. And then we get 80 to 100% infiltration, and then assuming we design it correctly so that all the water doesn't flow right out of the bottom in a perforated pipe, and we get 0 to 80% runoff. So I guess I should say, this really should say 0 to 100% infiltration, because if it's designed with a perforated pipe and no way for water to be held back in the voids of the rock and the base rock below, which is what we're sizing today, then you have 0 infiltration and 100% runoff. So it really depends on how it's designed, and I encourage you to go through this PowerPoint presentation. I'll show you where to find it. It is on the OSU Extension Stormwater Solutions website. So if you Google OSU Stormwater Solutions, it'll take you to here. And let's just go there now. And then you can go to LID Academy, porous pavement resources, and it'll be down in there. I haven't posted it yet, but that is where it's going to be, along with, as you can see, a whole bunch of other information. And there's a lot of other stuff here too. Okay, so go back to our water balance model. All right. So water quality before, well, sediment is a natural system. Sediment transport is a natural process. So some sediment did move off of this site, but when we come in here and move all the dirt around and drive to it and do a lot of other things, we end up with a lot of other pollutants that are coming out of the air, so off of the roof. These are all the things that might be in the air, along with lots of other things. And then these are all the things that might be coming off of a pavement. Metals are might fall into the other debris category, I guess, but metals like copper and zinc are coming off of our cars, and these are all the things that might be coming off of our landscape areas. So with porous pavement, we really are only dealing with the things from the air and the things from the pavement and the cars that we are seeing. Porous pavement can get rid of sediment. That works quite well. Nutrients and other soluble pollutants, there's really not any way to take soluble pollutants out of runoff unless it's a chemical process. So on-site treatment really doesn't do a very good job of that, and that's why source control is such an important issue. And I'm circling this here, because when we cut this soil and filled it here and compacted it, we made it hard to grow anything. We basically turned this soil, we gave this soil the density of concrete. And anytime we do that, it's really hard for a plant to grow in it. The plant roots and all the microbes that live in the plant roots need air and water to be really healthy. So we're inviting a lot of fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and all sorts of other things to come off of the surfaces of our landscape area. So there's no, just to make the point, there's no substitute for source control. We need to do a better job of not compacting those soils. Okay, so fecals and biologicals, feces, biological stuff, pathogens, soil and the microbes in the soil do a pretty good job of removing those. Other debris, any particulate matter, it's going to do a good job of, and it's going to reduce runoff volume. So there is a lot of water quality benefit to porous pavements. Now, I'm going to explain to you why I am not endorsing detention as an LID practice. This is why you must reduce runoff volume to restore water quality. This is the connection between runoff volume and peak runoffs. So typically, and water quality at a watershed scale. So in the old days, and unfortunately the old days are still the new days, there are still agencies creating codes that are requiring detention, and only detention, and maybe not low impact development, although that is going to change very soon. Low impact development is coming down from the EPA as being required. But a lot of people don't understand the difference between low impact development and detention. So that's why I'm explaining it here. So detention, here's how a detention pond works. We have a rainfall event. We got a big hole in the ground, and as we have a model that says there's some pre-developed peak flow. So at the height of a storm, during let's say the jurisdiction wants to hold back the 25-year frequency 24-hour design storm. So that's a really big infrequent storm. But in the pre-developed, there's not the site still doesn't have a lot of runoff for the 25-year storm. So let's say that the peak rainfall in the pre-developed looks like this size flow, and that's what's allowed to flow off the site and continue out. And as long as the post-developed flow isn't exceeding the pre-developed flow, water comes into the detention basin and goes right out. But so post-developed, pre-developed flow rate. And there we go, post-developed is less than or equal to the pre-developed. But as the storm, so remember, hydrologic models used by engineers grossly overestimate this. engineers and engineering designers like myself do not have a good model that will generate 0.5% of runoff. So we have to use our common sense when we do watershed restoration. We can't rely totally on models. This model that I have, that I'm giving you, also grossly overestimates the runoff, but it matches what is expected, what you're expected to do and use for the for modeling stormwater, and we'll talk about that, what that model is in a second. So the storm is progressing, right? And it's getting more intense because it's a pretty big storm. It's a 25-year storm. It's very large and it's pretty infrequent. Happens every 25 years or so. That's the theory. So water is still only allowed to go out at the pre-developed flow rate, and water is starting to pond here. That's what the detention pond is all about. And the storm is growing, and water is still ponding, and the storm is letting off a little bit. Now we've reached the peak of the storm, but we're still ponding because the peak of the storm, even though we're past the peak of the storm, its water is still running off at a faster rate than it's allowed to leave the system. So water was still ponding there. And then the sun comes out, and the detention pond is still emptying, still emptying, long after a typical pre-developed site would be letting runoff go off the site. And what happens is we end up with stream scouring and reduced water quality, and reduced water quality from stream scouring, and reduced water quality for the habitat and the species that live in our rivers and streams. So this stream scouring can still happen with detention, even though detention is supposed to reduce flooding, which it's not. We could argue that it's not doing a very good job of that either, because on the East Coast, where we have highly urbanized watersheds with lots of detention basins, we're still getting regular flooding. So this is why detention is never going to save your watershed. Okay, and then the next slide goes into some things about some other things, but we're not going to cover those today. You can read all about those in the bullets. Let's go down to our case study. So that's slide 123. I think. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So our hydrologic design case study, where detention is required. This is just an example. The city of Turner in Oregon doesn't have a detention requirement, as far as I know, but we're just using this as an example. So let's assume we're in the city of Turner, Oregon. We have detention required, but porous pavement will be used instead, and that we are required to attenuate flows from the post-developed 25-year storm to half of the pre-developed 2-year storm. Why would we do that? Why would a jurisdiction require us to attenuate two different storms? So, and by attenuate, I mean that's what the detention basin was doing, right? It was allowing a certain flow from the pre-developed 25-year storm out, and comparing that against the post-developed 25-year storm, which is what a lot of agencies do. But here in Oregon, we have Clackamas County, which actually has this requirement to attenuate flows for the post-developed 25 to half of the pre-developed 2-year. And that's because it's the 2-year storm that scours that can scour the stream banks. It's the 2-year storm that shapes the channel in the watershed. So when that 2-year storm comes down more often and for a longer period of time, you still get scouring. And that also changes the depth of the water and the amount of water that's in a stream at any one particular time. And that can have a tremendous effect on the kind of plants that will grow in the river and the kinds of animals that will live in the river. So habitat and recreation are also impacted by detention-only facilities. We really want to get back to that 40% evaporation, 60% infiltration. Or if you're not in Western Oregon and you're looking at this, you want to find out what the water balance is for your region. Everybody has their own water balance, and you need to figure out what that is, and that means that you have to talk to some scientists. So they are being pretty conservative. They're saying, well, we want half of the pre-developed 2-year storm. So we're basically looking at the 1-year storm to attenuate back to. So this is the most conservative protective approach to detention, and that's what we're going to take a look at. So hydraulic isolation, that means we're going to assume that the city of Turner is not taking runoff from someplace else and either putting it in the base rock via subsurface pipes or putting it in the base rock via surface infiltration. And we're assuming that it's not in a flooded area because this would be a place that would kick up a lot of mud. It would leave a lot of mud there after the flood receded and clog the surface. And if you're wondering about how to site a porous pavement, we have a tool for that. It's down here in Design Your Site. Porous pavement, no, sorry. Gather data. Oh, decision trees. That's right. So we have about a couple decision trees. We've got more coming, but the porous pavement siting criteria will ask you questions. I don't know if I said this already. I'm getting my presentations crossed. So let's come back here. Okay. Green Girl caveat. I am not recommending detention ponds as a way to manage stormwater. These are not going to help you meet your water quality goals. I am giving you information so that when you look at what other agencies have done and required in their codes, you'll understand how it relates to porous pavements and your own jurisdiction's goals. So you really have to go back to the first video for this next step, this next portion. But we'll just go from there. So I'll go over it quickly. Different step 1, enter rainfall depth. So we're going to use a different use a different Excel sheet. We're not using the simple Excel sheet. We're using the detention Excel sheet, and we're entering the post-developed 24-hour rainfall depth that's of interest to our jurisdiction. So in the city of Turner, that is the 25-year, 24-hour storm. And this is a NOAA isopluvial, and you can see here, it's in tenths of an inch. So you can see here, Turner's here, that we have to manage the 4-inch storm. So we'll enter that in, 4-inch storm in our model. And then steps 2 and 9 are the same as the simple model. So I'm just going to take you over here to say, okay, here was the simple model. So I'll just step you through. So I'm going to change that from 2.5 inches to 4 inches. Everything else in the simple model is the same. Contribution area, storage rock area, drainage area coefficient, native soil infiltration rate. Notice that's very low, 0.1 inches per hour. It worked for us in the last round, and it might work for us here too. Depth of storage rock, 12 inches. Void ratio of storage rock, 40%. Outflow elevation above bottom of storage rock. I'm going to set that to 12 inches. This is true. So all of those steps are the same. And what we find out is, and if you want, as I say, if you want descriptions of those, go back to the first video. What we find is that the maximum ponding depth, when we analyze the ponding depth from the model, and the model, I promised to give you a quick tour of that. The model here is the Santa Barbara Urban Hydrograph. It's embedded into this rainfall depth here. So you see that value right there. That's the curve of the Santa Barbara Urban Hydrograph Type 1A. So here it's up there, it's 0.004. Here it's 0.006. It should be building until we get to about 8 hours, and then it'll unbuild. It'll slow down and be less intense. And over every 10-minute period, we're taking that rainfall depth and generating a runoff rate that with the rational method. So Q equals CIA. And I'll go into a little bit of detail in the first video, so I'm not going to hammer that. But this is a hybrid model, that conservatively generates runoff based on the hydrograph, the shape of the hydrograph, and the rational method. And just one more reminder that porous pavement does not have runoff. There's no runoff that comes off the surface of the porous pavement. The only runoff that might come off of it is if we designed it in such a way that there wasn't enough rock to store the storm. But we're trying to do that to make sure that there's no runoff. So that is just a convenient way to model porous pavement, is just to say that yes, there is runoff. That rainfall is runoff, but that rainfall is really just rainfall, and it's passing right through the surface and into the base rock where it's going to be stored and infiltrated. All right, so let's analyze the calculated values for our ponding area, which is the depth, which is the looking at the base rock. So we find that we have just a little under 4 inches of ponding in the base rock, and that accounts for the 40% void ratio that's in the base rock. So we don't need 12 inches of base rock. We really only need 4 inches of base rock. But we find out that the depth of water left in the storage trench after 30 hours is 2.32 inches. And that's because we have a pretty big storm, 4 inches, with a pretty low infiltration rate, 0.1 inches. But I kind of say, and 30 hours is a good rule of thumb in the Pacific Northwest, because we get rain, there are times of the year where we get rain every 24 hours. We don't get it for the entire 24-hour period, but we want to be empty and ready to go. So in the Type 1A, we tend to empty out our facilities in 30 hours. Type 2 rainfall distribution, like Pennsylvania has and lots of other places, that's often listed as 72 hours, because they're not going to get it. They're going to get a thunderstorm, and then it's going to be dry for days. So they're going to have a couple of days for it to empty out. But I say, so this, is the storage trench empty in 30 hours false? That doesn't necessarily have to be true if your jurisdiction's not too worried about it. We see here that after 30 hours, the size of the following storm that could be stored in the remaining rock is almost the size of our 25-year, 24-hour storm, which is 4 inches. So it's almost 4 inches here, and that also is accounting for the 40% void ratio. So we have a lot of storage in that 12 inches of base rock, where we could store another big storm the very next day. So, so any number here will cause a false, and so ponded water after 30 hours is the only thing checked here. This is all the stuff that I just said, and I put text in there so that you could access the information in a lot of different ways. So the other question we need to ask, if we don't care that it's not empty in 30 hours, is it empty in 72 hours? So that is what we want to check. And that is not here. So I did add that to the worksheet. I'm sorry about this. La la la. So let's go to the worksheet. Let's go to the Excel worksheet. So we're getting some falses there because we're not done yet. But if we look here, is the storage, so we're getting the same numbers here. Is the storage trench empty in 30 hours? No. So this may not need to be true. But is it empty in 72 hours? Yes, it is true that we can infiltrate 4 inches of rain, a really big storm, in 72 hours. So this should always be true. We don't want to go beyond 72 hours. And if that's not true, then you need to do some things to modify your design. So then we have some other calculated values here that are that geeks like me like to look at, and I'm not going to go through those. I will go through the rest of this model. So let's just work right here. The other cell, the other sheet, the pre-developed model, is what we need to look at whether or not the 25-year storm has been attenuated back to half of the 2-year storm. So I know from the video 1 that the 2-year storm is 2.5 inches, and so half of the 2-year storm is 1.25 inches. So in the pre-developed model, based on the same Santa Barbara urban hydrograph, we're going to generate runoff for the pre-developed model based on this storm here, the 1.25 inch storm. And the drainage area runoff coefficient is going to be much, much lower for the pre-developed site than it is for the post. So don't touch this. That is equal to this number over here, that you've already entered. So the white spaces are things that I think you can or should leave alone. So disturbance area. And you can see here I have some little love notes for you to tell you kind of what to do, to step you through here, step you through the steps in the worksheet. And then, yeah, so the drainage area runoff coefficient, the C, is going to be 0.1 instead of 0.98. So really, it's kind of saying that 10% of the runoff is coming off. We know that that's not really true, but if you go out onto the internet or you use some sort of engineering guidance for the rational method, there's lots of values listed out there for the runoff coefficient, the C part of Q equals CIA, and you'll find that 0.1 for woodlands is an appropriate number. So that's what I'm using, is just good engineering, but good engineering standard. Even though it's not necessarily a good engineering standard, it's best engineering practice. So that would be accepted by a court of law or something like that. So 0.1 is a reasonable number, and we have some other calculated values. So the peak pre-developed runoff rate is 0.11 CFS, right? So that means that pre-developed, that little arrow with the pre-developed rate would have to be held back to 0.11 CFS if we were using a detention pond. So let's go back here. Now we have some other numbers that we can look at. Other calculated values and calculated, we looked at that. So calculated values, the 25-year storm attenuation. So I remind you here, complete the pre-developed model worksheet first. So that's what we just did. Very easy. This peak pre-developed runoff rate is being carried over from the pre-developed model that I showed you. The peak post-developed inflow rate is calculated from the post-developed hydrograph that's down here. And then peak post-developed outflow rate from the control structure is 0 CFS. That's because we don't really even need a control structure. We have the maximum ponding depth is 4 inches, and my control structure, my base rock is 12 inches, and my control structure is 12 inches. If I change this to 4 inches, it doesn't change anything. I still have I'm still getting a true when I say is the post-developed 25-year storm attenuated, and I'm still getting no runoff coming off the site. Now, if I put a control structure on here that doesn't pond enough water, let's say I say it's only going to pond 1 inch of water, well, then I do have some runoff coming out of the control structure. And guess what? I no longer am attenuating the 25-year storm. So how you design these really matters, and we have to be ponding water in the rock. So let's just change that we're going to change it to 12, because I'm just saying for simplicity, I'm going to leave the whole 12 inches there to pond and never overflow through the pavement surface, but an outflow structure would drain it before it got to there. So I have 12 inches of capacity in my rock. And that 12 inches is based on a guess for, not the outflow, but that 12 inches, the depth of the storage rock, is based on a guess and my experience with porous asphalt, which has the deepest, which is usually porous asphalt and permeable pavers and are flexible pavements, they usually require 12 inches minimum of base rock on a wet, uncompacted soil to handle H20 traffic loading. So H20 traffic loading is 16,000 pounds per axle, which is what an 18-wheeler is expected to have. So, I just start with 12 inches. That's where that came from. So, ta-da! We have attenuated the 25-year storm, and we can move on with our day and use porous pavement. Okay, well, thank you for joining me. That's it, and I hope that I see you on other videos. See you, kind of. If you need to get a hold of me, here I am again, Maria Cahill. There's my email's greengirl@greengirlpdx.com. There's my phone number. Give me a call and we can talk about this model. Thanks a lot and have a great day.